I have been asked in the years since, what made me open that gate? I never had a clean answer. The honest one is that I opened it before I thought, and by the time thinking caught up, she was already inside and I was already in it up to my neck. A man can dress that up a dozen ways: duty, decency, the code my father hammered into me on a ranch that no longer exists, but the truth is simpler and harder to say out loud. I looked down at her and I could not look away and ride on. That is the whole of it. My name is Cord Hallett. In the autumn of 1874, I ran 600 head of cattle on a stretch of high desert country in the Arizona Territory that most men rode through without stopping, and a few stopped at without meaning to stay. The Sonora Rimrock rose behind my north pasture like a wall somebody had built to keep the rest of the world out, and some days I was grateful for it. I had been alone on that land for 3 years by then, alone in the way that settles into a man's bones and stops feeling like a wound and starts feeling like weather. My wife Aneth had died of fever in the spring of 1871. I had buried her under the single juniper that grew at the east edge of the yard and gone back to work the next morning because there was nothing else to do, and the cattle did not grieve on anyone's schedule but their own. I was not an unhappy man. I want to be clear about that. Unhappy suggests something unfinished, something still reaching. I had stopped reaching. I ran my land, kept my accounts, spoke when spoken to in town, and did not ask the days to be more than they were. It was a life. It was enough. That was what I believed on the evening of October the 9th, 1874, when I came around the corner of the barn at sundown and found her lying against the gate post. She had made it that far on her own and not a step farther. I could see that much at a glance. The way a person's body tells the whole story of what it has cost them to arrive somewhere. She was on her side with her back against the post and her knees drawn up and one hand pressed flat against the ground as though she needed to feel something solid. She was Apache, or I thought so from the dress, the moccasin boots, the dark hair loose and tangled with trail dust. She was young, though not as young as fear makes people look. Maybe 26, 27. There was a wound on her left side where the fabric had darkened and dried, and she was breathing in the shallow, careful way of someone who has learned that breathing can hurt. She was looking at me. That was the thing I noticed most after the wound. She was not looking away. There was no fear in it, or rather, the fear was there, but underneath it something else was holding steady. She was measuring me the same way I was measuring her, and she was doing it better. I stood still and let her. "You need help," I said, which was not a question. She did not answer. I would learn later that she spoke some English, more than she showed me that night, but she had made a decision about what to give and what to hold back, and she stuck to it. I could not fault her for that. I crouched down so I wasn't standing over her. I've got a house and a fire and I can clean that wound. That's what I'm offering. I'm not offering anything else and I'm not asking anything in return. You can say no. She watched me for a long moment. Then, very slowly, she moved her hand from the ground and let me help her up. Her name was Saya. She told me that the second day, when the fever had broken enough for her to sit up in the spare room and take a cup of broth without my hand behind her back. She said it the way you say something you've decided to give, one word, clean, watching to see what I would do with it. "Cord," I said, and put my hand flat on my chest so she'd know what I meant. She nodded once and went back to the broth. That was the whole of our introduction. I have had longer ones with men I trusted less. The wound was a graze, a rifle ball that had torn along her left ribs without going in, which was the only reason she was alive to reach my gate. But a graze on the ribs is not a small thing. It had gone deep enough to worry, and the 2 days she'd spent crossing open country before she found me had not done it any favors. I had cleaned it the first night by lamplight, working as carefully as I knew how, and she had not made a sound. Not one. She lay still and let me work and looked at the ceiling, and I thought about the kind of discipline that takes and was humbled by it. I sent my one hired man, a quiet Texan named Burl Oates, into Rimrock Station the next morning for the doctor. Doc Fenner came out, looked at the wound, said I'd done a decent job of cleaning it, left some carbolic and fresh bandaging, and rode back without asking a single question I hadn't volunteered answers to. I appreciated that about Fenner. He understood that some situations were not his business and carried himself accordingly. Burl took his bedroll to the bunkhouse without being asked and gave no opinions. He was that kind of man. I had hired him for exactly that quality among others, and he had never disappointed me. So there were 3 of us on Hallett's Gate through those first weeks of October, Burl out with the cattle, me running the place and checking on Saya twice a day, and Saya in the spare room healing on her own terms. She did not stay in the spare room for long. I came in from the morning feed on the 6th day to find her at the kitchen table with a cup of water, and one of my survey maps spread open in front of her. She was studying it the way you study something you know better than the person who made it. I poured myself coffee and sat across from her, and did not say anything about the map. After a while she put her finger on a spot northeast of the rimrock. "Wrong," she said. It was the first English word she had offered me. "How wrong?" I said. She looked at me to see if I was worth answering. Then she moved her finger half an inch to the left and up. "Water here, spring, not there." I looked at the spot she was indicating. There was nothing marked on the survey. I had ridden that country twice in 3 years and missed it both times. "You're sure?" I said. She looked at me with an expression that managed, without any particular effort, to make me feel like a man who had just asked whether the sun came up in the east. "All right," I said, "I believe you." She folded the map and pushed it back across the table to me. Then she picked up her water and looked out the window at the rimrock and did not say anything else for the rest of the morning. I thought about that spring for 2 days before I rode out to look. It was exactly where she said it was, a good spring, clean water, coming up through a shelf of red rock in a draw I had ridden past a dozen times without looking down the right way. I sat on my horse for a while and looked at it and thought about what else I had ridden past without looking down the right way. I rode home and told her I'd found it. She nodded like she'd never doubted I would. By the end of October she was up and moving, carefully, and the wound was knitting the way Fenner had said it would if she didn't aggravate it. She did not aggravate it. She also did not sit still and rest the way I'd suggested, though she was careful enough about what she took on that I stopped arguing. She had begun to teach me things. I don't know exactly when it started or who started it. It grew the way things grow in dry country, slowly, underground, and then all at once visible. She would say something about what she saw, and I would ask what she meant, and she would show me, and I would find I was seeing something I'd been looking at for 3 years without understanding. The way the cattle moved before a change in weather. The way certain plants grew only where water lay beneath the surface. The way the light fell on the rimrock in the late afternoon and told you something about the next morning if you knew how to read it. I had thought I knew this country. I had worked it, ridden it, mapped it badly, and buried my wife in it. I had not known it at all. "Your people were here before the survey men," I said one afternoon, watching the way she read a stretch of ground we were walking along the north fence line. She could walk the fence line now without favoring her side more than a little. "Yes," she said. "Long before." "Yes." I thought about that. Then you know things about this land that the survey never caught. She looked at me sideways. "Most things." "And you've been telling me some of them." "Some," she said. "Why?" She was quiet for a moment, which with Saya was not evasion but consideration. She didn't waste words, and she didn't give them until she'd weighed them, and I had come to understand that what came after a silence from her was worth waiting for. "You opened the gate," she said. That was all she said. We walked the rest of the fence line without speaking, and the rimrock went red in the late sun, and I thought about what it costs a person to say a simple thing plainly and mean all of it. I should say something about what I was not. I was not a man who had made his peace with the Apache wars the way some men did, by deciding that the wars were right, and the losing side deserved what it got. I had lived in this territory long enough to know that the account was more complicated than that, and I had seen enough of what the army and the settlers and the territory men had done in the name of civilization to have my own opinions about who was civilized. I kept those opinions to myself mostly, because they were not popular in Rimrock Station, and I had no interest in arguing politics over a store counter. But I had opinions, and they shaped how I looked at Saya from the beginning, not as something foreign or threatening or in need of explaining, but as a person who had been scattered from her people by violence she had not started, and had found her way to my gate by a combination of stubbornness and skill I could only admire. What I had not expected was how much she would change the shape of my days. It happened quietly. She began to help with small things around the house, not because I asked, but because she decided to, and she made it plain that her deciding to was not the same thing as obligating herself to me. There was a distinction there she held on to very clearly, and I respected it. She cooked when she felt like it, in a way that was different from how I cooked, and better, and I ate what she made and said so. She repaired a piece of tack that had been sitting in the corner of the barn for 2 months waiting for me to get around to it, and she did it with a competence that made me feel slightly ashamed of the corner it had been sitting in. She began to learn the cattle by sight, which Burl found remarkable enough to mention to me quietly one morning, saying that he had never seen anyone learn individual animals that fast. "She reads things," I said. Burl nodded slowly, the way he nodded when he was filing something away. "Seems like," he said, and went back to work. She also taught me words. Slowly, without making a lesson of it, the way you hand something to someone without drawing attention to the handing. The word for water, for stone, for the rimrock, for morning and evening and the kind of cold that comes in off the desert before dawn and sits in your lungs until the sun gets up proper. I was a poor student and I knew it, but she was patient in the way that is not really patience at all but something harder. A decision that you are worth the effort, renewed every day. I cannot tell you the exact moment I understood that I was being trusted. I can tell you that when I understood it, I stood very still for a long moment and felt the weight of it. November came in hard. The high desert in November is not kind to anybody, and the cattle wanted watching, and the fence line wanted riding, and the water supply wanted more attention than the survey spring could get in a freeze. Burl and I were out from first light most days. Saya stayed at the house when the cold was at its worst, and I did not have to tell her why. She knew weather and she knew limits, and she observed both with the same clear-eyed practicality she brought to everything else. But there were days when she rode with me. I had a spare horse, a bay mare named Dusk that Aneth had ridden. I had not put anyone on her since. When Saya asked by way of looking at the horse and then at me without a word, I said yes without thinking twice. She rode well, better than well. She rode the way people ride when they learned before they learned anything else, with the horse as part of the thought and not the instrument of it. I watched her take Dusk out to the east pasture one morning and felt something loosen in my chest that I had not known was tight. We rode the Rimrock country together on the good days, and she showed me things I had been living next to for 3 years without seeing. A place where the Sonora Rimrock turned a certain way and caught the wind so that you could hear something that sounded, on still mornings, almost like a voice. A shelf of red stone where the hawk pears nested in spring. A wide flat draw where the grass grew thick even in the dry months because water was moving beneath it 30 feet down, and the grass knew. "You learned all of this," I said one morning, up on the Rimrock with the desert spreading out below us in the cold gray light. "My people learned it," she said. "I learned from them." "From your mother." "From my grandmother, my mother too, my brother." She said it evenly, but I heard what was inside it. "Where are they?" I asked, and then immediately regretted it because the question was too direct and too raw for a cold morning on a rock. She looked out over the desert for a long time. "Scattered," she said at last. "The raids, soldiers and settlers together out of Redwall, 3 weeks before you found me. Some went east, some I don't know." "Are you looking for them?" "When I can travel, yes." "I thought about that. You're not healed enough yet." "No," she agreed. There was no bitterness in it, just the fact clean and set aside. We sat on the rimrock in the gray morning light and watched a hawk quarter the flats below us, and I thought about what it is to be scattered, and about what it costs to simply say the word, and set it aside and go on. It was in those weeks that I began to understand something about myself that I had been successfully avoiding for 3 years. I had told myself that I was at peace, that the work was enough, the land was enough, the days strung together end to end were enough. And what I had actually done was make a very thorough job of going away inside myself and calling it contentment. Aneth would have seen it. She had been that kind of woman, the kind that sees the thing you are doing while you are busy explaining why you are not doing it. I had missed that seeing for 3 years without admitting that missing it was part of what I carried. Saya saw things too. Not the same way, she was not Aneth and I did not confuse them, but in the way of someone who watches before they speak and does not accept the face of a thing for the truth of it. She watched me the way she watched the cattle and the weather and the lay of the land, without judgment, without agenda, with only the clear intention of understanding what she was looking at. I found that I did not mind being seen. That was the thing that startled me. I had minded it for 3 years. I had kept people at a comfortable distance, Burl, Doc Fenner, the men at the store in Rimrock Station, not with hostility but with the particular brand of courtesy that says I am fine, and I need nothing from you and this conversation can end any time now. I had not noticed I was doing it until I found myself not doing it. I was telling her about Aneth one evening, not planning to and not making much of it, just speaking the way you speak when the room is quiet and the fire is going, and there is someone across from you who is not asking you to explain yourself, but is simply there. I told her about the fever and the spring it came and how fast it had moved, and about burying her under the juniper and going back to work the next morning. I told her that I thought I had handled it well, and that I was almost certain now I had not. Saya listened without moving. When I stopped, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "You are still here." "On the ranch," I said. "Yes, and also," she touched her chest briefly, "the way you indicate something internal. Still here." I looked at the fire. "I thought I wasn't," I said, "for a while." "I know," she said. "You are not good at hiding it for a man who tries so hard." I looked at her then, and she was watching me with an expression that had something almost like warmth in it. Almost. The way a fire seen through a window is almost warm. She was not offering me anything. She was simply telling me what she saw. And what she saw, apparently, was a man who was still there, still in it, still capable of more than he was giving the days. I did not know what to do with that. I sat with it for a long time after she'd gone to bed and the fire went down, and the night got cold, and I thought about what it costs a person to be seen and choose not to run. December. The freeze came in earnest and we battened down. Burl moved from the bunkhouse to the spare room off the kitchen. Saya had moved to Aneth's old sewing room, which was smaller but had a better stove. And we were 3 people in a house that had held one for 3 years, and the house was better for it in ways I did not want to examine too closely. We ate together at the kitchen table. We argued mildly about the best way to manage the South herd in the cold. Saya won the argument as it turned out, and the South herd came through the December freeze without a single loss, while the neighbor I spoke to in town lost 11 head doing it the way I would have done it. Burl observed this with his characteristic silence, and then said to me one morning, while we were breaking ice on the water trough, "She knows cattle." "She knows land," I said. "Cattle come with the land." Burl thought about this. She know people as well as she knows land. Better, I said. He nodded slowly and went back to the ice. I had stopped thinking of Saya as a guest by then, or as a patient, or as a situation that would resolve itself when the weather broke and she could travel again. I am not sure when that happened. I know that one morning I was laying the fire in the kitchen, and I heard her come down from the sewing room, and the sound of her on the stairs was simply the sound of someone who lived in the house, and I felt nothing remarkable about it. And then I stopped and felt the unremarkable quality of it quite keenly, and stood there with the kindling in my hands for a moment longer than necessary. She came in and looked at me. "The fire is not going to lay itself," she said. "No," I said, "it's not." I laid the fire. There is a thing that happens between people who live in close quarters and work hard and have the same long silences and the same cold mornings and the same particular quality of attention to the world around them. It does not happen fast. It does not announce itself. It grows in the space between conversations and in the moments when you look up from what you are doing and find someone looking up too, at the same hawk or the same cloud or the same particular slant of winter light on the rimrock, and you do not need to say anything about it because the looking is enough. I was in love with her. I did not say it to myself in those words for some time, because saying it in those words would require doing something about it, and I was not certain what to do. There were 10,000 reasons why it was complicated, and perhaps two that argued the other side, and I lived with all of them for the rest of December and into January, and let them sort themselves out. She was Apache. I was a white rancher in Arizona Territory. I was 44 and had been a widower for 3 years and had made a good job of convincing myself I was done. She was healing from a wound and scattered from her people, and had her own plans for when the weather broke, plans that did not necessarily include a gate on the Sonora Rimrock. I had not asked her to stay. She had not offered to stay. We had not said one word to each other about any of what was growing in the space between our silences, and there was every possibility that what I felt was entirely mine, and that she felt nothing of the kind. I decided to say nothing and do nothing, and let the winter run. She made that decision complicated. It was late January. The worst of the freeze had broken, and there were 2 or 3 days in a row of pale winter sun, cold but clear, and we rode the Rimrock country together on the good day in the middle of them. We went farther than we'd gone before, up to a high shelf above the Sonora Rimrock, where you could see the whole of the Arizona flats stretching out to the south and east, enormous and silent, and lit up in the winter sun like something that had been waiting for you to climb high enough to see it. We sat on that shelf for a long time without talking. Then she said, "My grandmother brought me here once." I looked at her, "To this shelf?" "Near here, when I was 12. She wanted me to see the country from above so I would understand how large it was and how small I was inside it." She paused. She said, "A person who does not know how small they are will spend their life being surprised." She sounds like a wise woman. She was quiet for a moment. She died 2 winters ago before the raid. "I'm sorry." She nodded without looking at me. "She would have liked you," she said. She had no patience for men who were too proud to see what was in front of them, but she respected a man who could learn. I sat with that for a moment. "And you," I said, "do you respect a man who can learn?" She turned and looked at me directly, which she did not always do, and when she did it, it always meant something. "Yes," she said, "I do." The flats spread out below us, enormous and pale and lit. A hawk was working the updrafts along the Rimrock's face, and the cold was clean and still, and I thought about 12 years old and a grandmother and a lesson about smallness, and about what it is to be seen on a high shelf in winter light. "Saya," I said. "I know," she said. We looked at each other for a long time, then she looked back at the flats. "My people may come in the spring," she said, "to find me, or I may find them first. I have not decided." "I understand," I said. Do you? I think so. I looked at the hawk. I am not asking you to give up anything. I am not asking you to stay against your own knowing. I am only asking. I stopped, because the words were harder than I had expected. What, she said, not a question, an invitation. Whether what is here is worth, I stopped again. Whether you would be willing to see if it is worth something, before you decide. The hawk made a long, slow circle on the updraft, and disappeared behind the rimrock. I have been seeing, Saya said, for 4 months. I did not say anything. You are a difficult man, she said, and there was something in it that was not quite a smile but was close enough. I know, I said. You are also, she paused, and I could see her weighing the words. You are also a man I have not been wrong about, and I am not often wrong. No, I said, you're not. We rode home in the winter light, not touching, not needing to, and the horses moved together on the trail like they had always been meant to run it side by side. February. The world did not resolve itself neatly. It never does. There were men in Rimrock Station who had opinions. I heard about the opinions second-hand from Burl, from Fenner, once from the storekeeper Greel, who mentioned it the way you mention something you personally find distasteful but feel obligated to report. I told Greel that I appreciated the information and that I planned to do nothing with it, and he nodded and weighed out my flour, and we did not speak of it again. Burl had no opinions, or if he did, he kept them where he kept everything else, somewhere interior and well-managed. Fenner came out in February for a final look at the wound, and declared it healed clean, and said to Saya, with the particular courtesy he reserved for people he respected, that it was good work she'd done keeping it from going bad on the trail. She thanked him and he rode back, and that was the end of the medical portion of the business. What I could not resolve and could not put aside was the question of her people. She thought about them constantly. I knew this without being told, the way you know when someone is holding something in the middle of themselves. She was not unhappy in the way of loss or longing, exactly. She was suspended, the way a person is suspended when one thing is pulling them forward and another thing has not yet released them. I understood that suspension. I had lived in it for 3 years, pulled forward by nothing, held back by a grave under a juniper tree. I could not ask her to choose. I could not ask her to give up what was hers in order to take up what was mine. Those were not terms I was willing to set. What I could do, and what I did in the first week of February, was ride east along the Rimrock until I found a man who knew the country and the people in it better than I did. His name was Tully Crane. He had been a scout for the Army for 10 years, then quit in circumstances he described briefly as a disagreement about methods, and now lived in a one-room house at the edge of the Redwall country, and knew more about the movement of Apache bands in the territory than anyone in Rimrock Station would have admitted was possible. I had met him twice before. He was not a comfortable man to know, but he was an honest one. I told him what had happened and what I was asking, and let him make of it what he would. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "What's her band?" "I don't know the name. Her grandmother was a woman of some standing, her brother." Crane thought, "Eastern Sonora Group. There's a camp maybe 4 days east, moved in November after the Redwall action." He looked at me. "You want me to find them?" "I want to know where they are," I said, "so she can know." He looked at me for another long moment. "That's a particular kind of thing to do," he said. "Yes," I said. "You understand she might go to them and not come back." "Yes," I said. He studied me with the eyes of a man who has learned to read the thing behind the face and trust what he reads there. Then he nodded. "Give me 2 weeks," he said. I did not tell Saya what I had done. I have thought about that since, whether it was the right call. I think it was. The information was hers to have or not have, and I had not yet confirmed there was information to give, and I did not want to raise something I couldn't deliver. I have also thought about the fact that I was terrified, not of what she would do with the information, but of who I was becoming in the doing of it. 3 years of not reaching, and here I was riding 4 hours east in the February cold to find a woman scattered people, so she could choose freely between them and me. I thought Aneth would have found it instructive. I ran the ranch. Saya ran it beside me. In the evenings we sat at the kitchen table and talked about the South herd, about the spring planting, about the water supply from the Rimrock spring she'd identified that I was now running a pipe to. We talked about her grandmother and about my father's ranch in New Mexico, which no longer existed, but which I still thought about sometimes the way you think about a place that formed you. We talked about the hawk pairs that nested on the shelf above the Rimrock, and whether they came back to the same nest every spring. They do, she said, the same pair, the same nest. They repair it in early March. How do you know they're the same pair? She looked at me with the expression that had become, over the months, something close to affectionate in its patience. You can tell, she said. Can you always tell? If you watch long enough, she said, yes. I thought about watching long enough. About what you could know about a creature if you gave it time and paid attention, and did not decide in advance what you were looking at. Crane came back in the 3rd week of February. He found me at the south fence alone and told me what he'd found without getting off his horse. A camp 4 days east, moving toward the Sonora in early spring as was their custom. Her brother's name, Crane, had confirmed it. A woman called Leah who was her mother's sister. Alive and intact, both of them, not looking for her because they had no way of knowing she had survived the raid. I thanked him and paid him and went back to the ranch. That night at the kitchen table, I told Saya what I had done. She went still. I told her the whole of it, Crane, the camp, her brother, her aunt, all of it, and then I stopped and let her sit with it. She sat with it for a long time. The fire went through 2 or 3 changes, and the night settled in, and neither of us moved. Then she said, "You did this." "Yes," I said. "You went to find them." It was not a question, but it held a question inside it. "I wanted you to be able to choose," I said. "Whatever you choose, I wanted it to be your choice, and not something that happened to you by accident." She looked at me for a very long time with an expression I could not entirely read, which was unusual. She read the world clearly, and I had learned to read her face the same way over the months, but this was something I had not seen before. It was not grief, and it was not gratitude exactly, and it was not what I would have called happiness. It was something more serious than all of those, something that lives below those things and holds them up. "You are not what I expected," she said. "I know," I said. "I'm not sure what I expected either." "A man who opens a gate," she said slowly, like she was working something out, "and then finds your people so you can leave him." "That is," she stopped. "Complicated," I offered. "No," she said, "it is simple. That is why it is hard to understand. Simple things always are." I looked at the fire. "I need to see them," she said. "My brother, my aunt. I need to know they are well with my own eyes." "Of course," I said. "And then," she said, "I need to tell them about the gate." I looked up. "I need to tell them," she said quietly, "what kind of man opened it before I decide anything, before I ask them anything." She paused. "They will want to see you." I sat very still. "All right," I said. "It may be that they will not." She stopped and started again. "It may be difficult." "I understand that." "Do you?" "Probably not entirely," I said. "But I'll stand still and let them look at me, the way you looked at me at the gate, and I'll trust that what they see is enough." She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "That is the right answer." "Is it?" "Yes," she said. "It is the only answer that could be right." We rode east in early March, when the weather had broken enough to travel. Burl held the ranch. He shook my hand the morning we left with the expression of a man who had done his figuring and reached a conclusion he was not going to share aloud but which was visible in the handshake. I appreciated that. I said I'd be back in 2 weeks. He said to take 3 if I needed them. I said that was fine. The 4 days east were the best traveling I had done in years, which I recognized as a thing that would have surprised me 4 months earlier. We rode easy and talked when we felt like it and were quiet when we didn't, and the silence between us was the kind that has something warm inside it rather than something empty. I pointed out things I had noticed on the high desert that I was still learning to name, and she corrected me gently when I was wrong and said nothing when I was right, which I took as the higher compliment. On the second evening, camped in a draw below a redstone ridge, she told me about her brother. His name was Danu. He was 3 years older than her and had been the one who taught her to read the land from above, not from a high shelf, but from a hawk's sense of it, the pattern beneath the ground. He was, she said, a man who took his time forming an opinion and was thereafter entirely immovable. She said this with the particular combination of admiration and exasperation that belongs only to siblings. "Will he like me?" I said. She thought about this very seriously. "No," she said, "not at first. But eventually." "If you are what I believe you are," she said, "eventually, yes." "And what do you believe I am?" She looked at the fire. "A man who learned to see," she said. "That is a rare thing where I come from. It is a rare thing everywhere." I thought about the survey map and the spring and the hawk pears and the particular slant of winter light on the rimrock, and about all the things I had ridden past for 3 years without looking the right way. "I had a good teacher," I said. She looked at me. In the firelight her face was entirely readable, which was itself something she was choosing, something she was giving. "Yes," she said, "you did." The camp was in a wide valley below the eastern foothills, sheltered by a bend in the rock that turned the wind. It was a good camp, well placed, and I noticed before anything else that the placement was deliberate. The same quality of land reading I had spent the winter learning, written into the choice of where to stop. We were seen long before we arrived. I expected that and sat easy in the saddle and let us be looked at. Danu came out to meet us first. He was taller than I had imagined and younger looking, and he looked at his sister for a long time before he looked at me. What passed between them in that look I cannot fully describe. It was the kind of reunion that happens between people who have not known whether the other was alive, and it does not require words, and it is not mine to put into words here. Then he looked at me. I sat still and let him. He looked for a long time. He was doing what Saya had done at the gate, measuring, without any particular hurry, deciding what he was looking at. I thought about what she had told me and sat still and let him finish. Then he said something in Apache. Saya answered. He said something else. She answered again, shorter this time, with a particular quality in her voice that I recognized as the voice she used when she was not going to discuss something further. He looked at me again. Then he said in English, "You are the man at the gate." "Yes," I said. He was quiet for a moment. "She says you found us, that you went to find us for her." "Yes." "Why?" It was not exactly a question. It had the shape of one and the weight of something more. "Because," I said carefully, "she should be able to choose where she goes and what she carries with her. That choice belongs to her. It doesn't belong to me to make it for her by keeping information from her." He looked at me for a long time. Then he looked at his sister and back at me. "Come," he said. "I will not give you all of the 3 days we spent in that valley, because most of it belongs to Saya and her people and not to me. I will tell you what I can." I was looked at a great deal. I was spoken to carefully and listened to with more attention than I was accustomed to, and I tried to deserve it. The elder, a woman called Neva, her aunt, small and precise, and with eyes that reminded me of Saya's in their quality of seeing clearly and saying so, sat with me on the second morning, and asked me questions about the ranch and the rimrock and the spring Saya had found on my survey map. She asked them the way someone asks when they are not looking for information, but for the manner of the answering. I answered as plainly as I knew how. At the end of it she was quiet for a moment, and then she said something to Saya, who was sitting a little behind me. Saya answered. Neva looked at me again. She says, Saya said, that the country you run is good country, that a man who listens to what the land says is a man who will not ruin it. Tell her, I said, that I had a teacher. Saya translated. Neva's expression changed in a way I could not read precisely, but which had something in common with the expression Saya made when she was deciding something had gone well. Danu was harder. He was not unfriendly, but he was not easy either, and I did not expect him to be, and I did not try to make it easy for him. I answered his questions straight and accepted his silences without filling them, which I had learned to do over the winter, and by the third day something had shifted between us. Not warmth, not yet, but the beginning of a mutual decision to be honest with each other, which is where warmth comes from if you give it time. On the last morning, he sat across from me at the fire. She says you want her to stay, he said. I want her to choose, I said, whatever she chooses. These are not the same. No, I agreed, they're not. He looked at the fire. She has been telling me about the winter, the spring she found on your map, the south herd. He paused. The gate. I waited. I do not know what to think of you yet, he said. I want to be honest about that. I'd rather you were honest than certain, I said. He looked up at me. Certain can be wrong, I said. Honest at least tells you where you are. He was quiet for a moment. Then something moved in his face, brief, not quite humor, but in that family. She says you learn slowly, he said. She's right. But that you learn. I try to. He nodded once slowly, in the way of a man filing something away. Saya and I rode back west alone. Danu rode with us for the first half day and then turned south, back to the camp, and we watched him go. Well, I said. Well, she said. What did he say to you? She looked ahead at the rimrock growing larger on the horizon. He said that you sat still and let yourself be looked at. He said that was harder than most men manage. And he said that the spring was real, and that a man who would run a pipe to it deserved to keep it. High praise, I said. From Danu, she said, it is. We rode for a while in the thin spring sun, the desert coming back to life around us in the small, specific ways it did, a green thing pushing through a crack in the rock, a hawk up on the thermals, the rimrock going pink in the afternoon light. What did you decide? I said. She was quiet for a moment. Not the weighing kind of quiet, but the kind that means the decision has already been made and she is finding the right words for it. I decided, she said, that the gate is worth coming back to. I looked at her. I will go to them in the autumn, she said, and come back in the spring. It is not a simple thing. There is no simple thing here. No, I said. But I can come back to the gate, she said, if the gate is still open. It will be, I said. She nodded. We rode on. The rimrock rose ahead of us, enormous and particular, and lit up in the late afternoon, the way she had taught me to read, like a thing that had been waiting for someone to come home to it. I have told this story plainly, and I will end it plainly. We were married in June of 1875, in a ceremony that satisfied nobody entirely and suited us completely. Fenner stood up for me. Neva came from the eastern camp with Danu and 2 others, and she brought something for Saya that had been her grandmother's, and there was a moment at the edge of the yard, under the juniper where Aneth was buried, where Saya stood with the thing in her hands and looked at the tree for a long time, and I stood a little back and let her have it. Then she looked at me, and I walked up to her, and we were married. Danu came to the ranch for the first time in September. He stayed 2 weeks, and we rode the rimrock country together, the 3 of us, and he taught me things Saya had not gotten to yet, which was considerable. And by the end of the 2 weeks we were not easy with each other, not simple, but honest, which I have said before is where the good things come from if you give them time. He came back in the spring, and the spring after. Saya went east every autumn and came back every spring, and the going and the coming were both real and both hers, and I never once asked her to make them otherwise. The spring she had found on the survey map is still running. I laid pipe to it that second winter, and it feeds the north pasture now, and has not failed in the dry years, which is more than can be said for 3 springs the survey marked that turned out to be wishful thinking on somebody's part. The hawk pairs come back to the shelf above the rimrock every March. The same nest, repaired. I know them now, or I think I do, though Saya says you can only really know them if you have been watching long enough, and I am still, by her measure, relatively new to it. I keep the survey map on the kitchen table. The spring is marked on it now in her hand, in the right place. There are other marks on it too, things she has shown me over the years, things I would have ridden past for the rest of my life without seeing. The map is covered in her handwriting and mine, and the two look different and belong together, and I think that is about right. The gate is open. It has been open since October of 1874, and I do not intend to close it.